Of the various territories across the USA, few have produced as many high-profile cryptid encounters as West Virginia. This mountainous region has been the backdrop for both the Flatwoods Monster and the Mothman sightings of the 1950s and 60s. However, a lesser-known creature is also said to haunt its countryside, an entity that would later become known as the Grafton Monster. During the 1830s, plans were devised to construct a vital road link through the inhospitable Appalachian Mountains. As part of this endeavor, those involved began to consider locations along the proposed route which might lend themselves to the establishment of new communities. One of the sites eventually chosen was a patch of land situated on a steep hillside adjacent to the Tygart River. The few families who initially established farmsteads in the area had tentatively named their community Grafton. A decade later, this fledgling town would unexpectedly become the intersection between a new stretch of railroad and the existing highway. Fully accessible by road, rail, and river, Grafton began to expand significantly. However, along with the prosperity that accompanied such development, the town's residents soon found themselves in a precarious position. Grafton's strategic importance made it the site of violent clashes during the American Civil War. Despite this, the years following that conflict heralded a period of unrestrained economic growth, which would continue for nearly a century, with numerous companies selecting the settlement as a place for keen investment. By the 1950s, however, this prosperous era came to an end as both financial and environmental factors led to the widespread withdrawal of industry. This left the once thriving community a shell of its former self, marked by abandoned and dilapidated factories, and struggling to maintain its identity amidst the chaotic politics of the Cold War. It is fair to say that its residents were completely unprepared for an unexpected and haunting encounter, which would thrust them back into the national spotlight. At roughly 11 p.m. on the 16th of June 1964, a young man named Robert Cockrell was driving through the town, making his way home from work. Cockrell, a reporter for the local newspaper known as the Grafton Sentinel, was eager to head straight to bed and get some sleep after working late at the paper's offices that evening. He had been traveling along Riverside Drive not far from where he lived, but had to reduce his speed as the road ahead transitioned into a series of meandering bends. As the reporter was negotiating one of the sharper bends, he was suddenly forced to slam his foot on the brakes. The headlights of his vehicle illuminated the outline of a bulky figure, standing in the middle of the carriageway. Staring straight ahead, Cockrell could not quite believe his eyes, as this lumbering creature ponderously continued its journey from one side of the road to the other. Considering the size and shape of the shadow it cast, he had at first reasoned that the hulking frame must have belonged to a bear. But at the same time, he realized it was almost completely white, rather than the black or brown he would have expected to see. In addition, the vehicle headlights were reflecting off what appeared to be a slick and almost oily pelt, like that of a seal, as opposed to the furry coat of an ursine mammal. Perhaps the most bizarre aspect of this creature was that no matter how much he stared, The young reporter could not discern anything that remotely resembled a head, situated anywhere atop its body. Instead, it appeared to possess a powerful set of upper arms and shoulders, which emphasized an almost rectangular profile, supported by two short and stocky legs. Seemingly unaware of either Cockrell or the car he was driving, the enormous being continued on its way regardless, emitting a shrill and high-pitched whistling sound as it did so, despite lacking any discernible mouth or other orifice which might have enabled it to produce such a commotion. Seconds later it was gone, pushing through the long grass at the side of the road and penetrating the tree line, before disappearing from view. For the next 30 seconds or so, Cockrell remained dumbfounded at the wheel of his car, his eyes flitting from the center of the road to the point where he had last seen the creature. His mind eventually made up, he turned the vehicle around and headed back into the center of the city, in order to share the story of this encounter with two of his colleagues. At first, neither Jerry Morse nor Jim Mauser had been keen to assist their co-worker, reasoning that he was merely overtired from the long day they had shared in the newsroom. But through his persistence, Cockrell was finally able to persuade both men to accompany him back to the location where he had seen the mysterious creature. Several minutes later, the trio found themselves standing out on the roadside surveying a trail of trampled flora and fauna, which led off into the woods. No sooner had they plucked up the courage to venture further through the tree line in pursuit of the strange entity, than all three men suddenly stopped in their tracks. A strange and protracted whistling sound came from in amongst the trees ahead of them, accompanied by the snapping of twigs and branches underfoot. This commotion immediately prompted the three reporters to retreat to Cockrell's car and drive directly back to their offices, where they would remain until daybreak, debating whether they should share the story of what they had experienced with the rest of their community. Having missed the deadline for publishing a fresh news story, Cockrell instead spent the day writing an article on his encounter with the creature, before submitting it to his editor. Thus, it was the following morning that the citizens of Grafton awoke to the news of a towering monster, which had been seen lurking on the outskirts of their city. Far from the ridicule that Robert Cockrell had anticipated, he instead found himself besieged by requests for further detail about what he had experienced. Within days, national newspapers had taken hold of the story, with the officers of the Grafton Sentinel being sent accounts of identical creatures seen around neighboring cities. So great was the interest in the sighting that for the rest of that summer, the local police were forced to turn away armed hunting parties and gangs of drunken youths looking to enter the woods. Many of these groups were causing issues for the residents on the outskirts of Grafton, as they rampaged across boundaries and fence lines searching for evidence of the creature. Despite several further sightings, the city authorities moved to quickly push back on Cockrell's account in an effort to stem the rising tide of would-be monster hunters. But over the coming years, more witnesses would approach the newspaper with their accounts of having seen the bear-like entity that the Cockrell incident had made famous. During one such encounter, a father and son had been felling trees in a patch of woodland which was situated not far from Grafton's city limits. As they had been coming towards the end of their task, the two dogs which they had brought with them for company had begun to bark uncontrollably. Lowering their chainsaws, the pair now became aware of a commotion approaching them, coming from deeper within the woods. Thinking they were being stalked by a bear, the two men moved across to their vehicle and retrieved their shotguns. Turning to face whatever was approaching, their jaws fell open in surprise. The bracken ahead of them parted to reveal an enormous being, entirely covered in a glistening